The monastery stood like a shadow against the hills, stone, ancient, and silent. Every hour of every day, its halls echoed not with voices, but with prayers whispered beneath breath. Silence wasn't merely expected there. It was demanded. The rule was sacred, absolute. To speak without permission was to defy not only the abbot, but God himself. For those who lived within those walls, silence became both sanctuary and prison. The monks rose before dawn, their bare feet brushing against the cold floors as they filed into the chapel. There, in flickering candlelight, they prayed in unison, not aloud, but in gesture, in rhythm. The hum of devotion without sound filled the air, like an invisible hymn. But beneath that stillness, fear lived. Every monk knew the stories. The rule of Saint Benedict promised peace, humility, and obedience, but it also warned of punishment. The abbot's authority was divine, and to break silence was to shatter the harmony of God's house. Those who did face penance, some fasted for days, others were confined. A few disappeared entirely. The penance cell waited for them. It was small, barely large enough to kneel. The walls were thick, sweating with damp. There was no window, only a slit in the stone where bread and water were passed through. The door was bolted from outside and reinforced with iron. No sound escaped it, not prayers, not cries, not the sound of a man losing his mind in darkness. Brother Matthew had heard of it since his first day. He was young, barely 20, full of faith but troubled by questions. His thoughts wandered where his tongue sometimes followed. It wasn't rebellion, only curiosity, a yearning to understand the silence that surrounded him. One evening, as they prepared for Vespers, Brother Thomas stumbled, spilling a small bowl of oil meant for the lamps. The oil soaked into the floor, wasted. No one moved. The air froze. And then, in the hush, Brother Matthew spoke, 3 words meant to comfort. "It can be clean." The room fell colder. The other monks looked down, their hands tightening around their robes. Silence was sacred. He had broken it that night. He was summoned to the abbot's chamber. The candles burned low, their smoke curling like incense toward the rafters. The abbot's face was lined and calm, but his eyes held something deeper, not anger, but disappointment sharpened into judgment. "Brother Matthew," he said softly, "you have spoken where God demanded silence." The young monk fell to his knees, trembling. "Father, I meant no disrespect. It was a moment of..." The abbot raised a hand. "Intent does not erase sin." There was no trial, no discussion. Punishment was not cruelty here. It was correction. To save the soul, one must break the body of disobedience. By midnight, Matthew was led to the penance cell. 2 brothers carried a single torch that barely pierced the dark corridor. The closer they came, the stronger the smell: stone, mildew, old wax, and something metallic beneath it all. When the door opened, the air was thick, unmoving. Matthew's breath caught as he saw the walls, streaked with faint marks, carved lines like scratches. He didn't ask what they were. He didn't need to. They stripped him of his habit, leaving him with only a thin tunic. A bucket of water was placed inside, along with a crust of bread. Then the torchlight vanished, and the door shut. The first hour passed in disbelief. He prayed. He whispered. He tried to focus on the rhythm of his heartbeat. But time inside the cell was not time as the world knew it. Hours dissolved into each other. He could not tell day from night. The dampness crept into his bones. His throat dried, and every sound became a question. Was that someone outside, or the sound of his mind breaking? Sometimes, he thought he heard footsteps in the hall. Once, he thought he heard weeping, or maybe it was only him, echoing. After 2 days, the abbot came. The door opened only long enough for a figure to enter, carrying a whip made of knotted cords. "You must learn silence through pain," the abbot's voice said, as though reciting a psalm. "Your tongue spoke against God's law. Now your back will remember it." The first strike landed like fire. The second tore skin. Matthew did not scream, not because he was brave, but because he was afraid to make another sound. The whip fell again and again until his breath came out in broken gasps. When it was over, he lay still. The abbot whispered a prayer and left him in darkness once more. Days turned into weeks. The water tasted of dust. The bread grew mold. He began to see light where none existed, visions of angels, of the Virgin, of mercy that would not come. He tried to speak to them, but his voice was gone, rasped away into silence. By the time he was released, he was barely able to walk. The others helped him to his cot, where he slept for 3 days. When he awoke, he did not look at anyone, did not speak. The rule had been carved into him, silence, through pain. But something in him had changed. The silence no longer felt holy. It felt haunted. He noticed things others did not, the way older monks flinched at certain hymns, the faint stains beneath the chapel floor, the whispers that sometimes came from behind closed doors at night. He realized then that he had not been the first to suffer in that cell, nor would he be the last. In that monastery, silence was not peace, it was power, and breaking it, even for mercy, could mean death. Years passed, and Brother Matthew's name faded from the monastery's records, just as so many before him had. Yet within those ancient stone walls, silence grew heavier, not as a vow of devotion, but as a cloak for secrets. Whispers spread quietly, passed only through gestures, through the trembling of hands during prayer. Brothers disappeared for days, sometimes weeks. When they returned, their eyes were hollow, their lips sealed not by choice, but by terror. They called it spiritual correction. But those who had endured it carried marks beneath their robes that no blessing could hide. The penance cells multiplied. What once was a single chamber beneath the chapel became a network of underground vaults, carved from rock, dripping with moisture. Some said the walls themselves had begun to absorb the cries that if you pressed your ear against the stone, you could hear faint sobs, too soft to be real, too steady to be forgotten. One winter, an older monk named Brother Elias was summoned by the abbot. He had been seen hesitating during prayer, his gaze drifting toward the sky instead of the crucifix. When asked why, he remained silent. To the abbot, silence without obedience was defiance. Elias was taken below. They bound his wrists, not with rope but with leather, tight enough to cut into the skin. The torchlight flickered as they opened the cell. He was pushed inside, the door closing with a sound that would echo through the monastery long after his breath had stopped for 3 days. No one brought food. On the 4th, a bowl of water was slid through the slit, frozen on the edges. On the 5th, the abbot ordered confession. When the door opened, Elias could barely lift his head. His voice, when it came, was weak, cracking through the dark. "I have nothing to confess," he said, "only that I have seen the truth. God does not dwell here." The abbot stepped closer, his shadow long against the wall. "Blasphemy," he whispered. "The devil speaks through you." Elias smiled faintly, not in defiance, but in pity. "Then perhaps the devil is the only one listening." At night, the sound of the whip returned. Some said it lasted an hour. Others said it went until dawn. When the door opened again, Elias did not move. His body was removed before sunrise, and the brothers were told he had succumbed to fever. But Matthew, now an old man himself, knew better. He had seen too much to believe in fevers. He had seen too many disappear into those cells, only to emerge pale and broken, or not at all. One stormy night, as thunder rolled across the hills, Matthew took a torch and descended into the forbidden lower vaults. The air was thick, reeking of mold and old blood. The stones beneath his feet were slick. He passed door after door, each sealed with iron bolts, each marked with a cross scratched deep into the wood. He stopped before one, the first cell, his own. The memories struck like wind against flame. The whispers, the hunger, the prayer that had turned into madness. He raised the torch and looked closer. There, barely visible beneath the soot, was writing carved with something sharp and desperate. "God forgive those who confuse silence with virtue." His hand trembled as he traced the letters. He realized they weren't his. They belonged to another, perhaps to one who had come before, perhaps to one who had never left. Behind him, a sound broke the air, a soft creak like a door shifting on its hinges. He turned, but no one was there. Only the empty corridor, the faint drip of water, and the dying flicker of the flame. The next morning, the abbot found the torch lying in the corridor. Brother Matthew was gone. The cell where his carving had been found was sealed once again, and no one spoke of it. The silence returned deeper than before. Decades later, when the monastery fell into ruin and the land was sold, workers uncovered the lower chambers. Inside the walls, they found fragments of bone, old iron cuffs, and faint etchings scratched by trembling hands. Some bore prayers, others, pleas, and on one crumbling door, beneath centuries of dust, the words remained clear. When silence means death, truth is the only sin. The monastery was abandoned. But the legend endured. Even now, travelers who pass its ruins claim that on windless nights, a voice can be heard within, not a scream, but a whisper, a single word, echoing through stone, mercy. Because in that place, silence was never peace. It was punishment. It was control. And it killed as surely as any blade or flame. History remembers the Inquisitions, the racks, the Iron Maidens, but not the Penance Cells. They were too quiet, too hidden, too holy to be questioned. Yet they remind us of something darker, that faith, when wielded without compassion, becomes its own instrument of torture. And somewhere, in every stone monastery or forgotten abbey, that silence still lingers. Not as a vow, but as a warning. If you found the story chilling, remember, the walls of history hide countless voices that were never allowed to speak. Don't let them be silenced again. Like, share, and subscribe to keep the past alive, and to uncover the truths the world tried to bury in silence.